Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we'll be looking at Class 10 Geography Chapter 7, Lifelines of National Economy. This is a very crucial topic for the upcoming Term 2 board exams, and I'm planning on making an entire series revolving around this chapter. I've already made a Part 1 and a Part 2, and I'll leave the links to those videos in the description box below, so be sure to check those out as well. In Part 1 we talked about the necessity and significance of transport, and how transport systems and economic growth go hand in hand. In Part 2, we talked about one aspect, or one domain of transport, which are roadways. And today, in Part 3, we'll be looking at another domain of transport, which is railways, or rail transport. So there's several benefits associated with rail transport, and the first one being through rail, we can travel longer distances with more people or a higher capacity of cargo or freight. Obviously, India has developed a dense network of railways. You can travel cities, states, and even entire regions through trains. The volume of cargo or the volume of trade that takes place through rail transport is currently 18%, which is actually lower than it used to be earlier. But nonetheless, it's still a very significant aspect of trade, domestic trade, that is, in India. So, thanks to the dense network that we've constructed in India, we can travel longer distances with rail transport. The second benefit is that rail transport has multifaceted uses, and this means that there's multiple different uses of rail transportation. For example, a large proportion of rural farmers use rail transport to move their agricultural produce to different states or regions. Rail transport is also used to facilitate transport for pilgrimages, and it's also used to transport families for vacation or leisure. And not to mention the most important use, which is cargo. So cargo trains are prevalent across India, and their main function is to transport goods. So rail transport has diverse uses, which is why it's very beneficial. The third benefit is that rail transport is relatively safer when we put it in comparison with road transport or air transport. And the reason behind this is that in rail transport, the pickup location and the destination point are both predetermined. There's no congestion, there's no sudden turns. The entire route is already established as the journey begins. So there's no opportunity to crash into other trains, or to take a wrong turn, or miscalculate your navigation. So it's much safer, especially when you're traveling with a family. However, it's not completely safe, because there's been several instances where the tracks have broken down in the middle of the path and trains have entered an accident or a tumble. But if we put it alongside air transport or road transport, it is relatively safer. The fourth benefit is that rail transport is eco-friendly, because you can transport a larger volume of people and goods in one single vehicle, and many countries are moving towards electric trains, which require no coking coal, and they're completely carbon neutral. So the greenhouse gas emissions are reducing, carbon footprint is drastically reducing, and the dependence on renewable resources is increasing. So on this basis, we can determine that rail transport is one of the most eco-friendly modes of transport. But of course, compared to road transport, railways have several drawbacks, pitfalls, and disadvantages. The first one being that rail transport cannot traverse every single terrain. And this is where roadways have a significant edge over railways. In a diverse country with several physiographic divisions like India, there's going to be several different terrains and several different topographies. But rail transport cannot traverse or it cannot cross all of these terrains. And this has led to an hindrance of development of railways in specific pockets with difficult terrain. For example, the northern plains were once the most ideal location for railways because they were the major source of granaries on account of the deposit of alluvial soil from the Himalayan mountains. The alluvial soil created an opportunity to cultivate extensively. And where there's cultivation, there's obviously going to be people. So the northern plains quickly became the most densely populated regions in India for agrarian purposes. And of course, the topography is plain land. It's completely flat. So it was considered as a suitable area for railways. However, there were several river networks since the alluvial soil is deposited by the deltas of the Indus River, the Brahmaputra River, and the Ganga River. So these river networks required the construction of bridges. And obviously, this infrastructure cost could not be affordable. It wasn't fully affordable by a government at the time. So we had to set aside a development of a dense railway network in the northern plains. But this pitfall is not limited to the northern plains. In Madhya Pradesh, there are several forest areas which cannot be traversed by railways. They could either be a part of the reserved forest or they could be situated in hilly regions where tribal people are located. So obviously, we can't relocate the tribals and we can't enter reserved forest areas. So Madhya Pradesh is out of the question. Rajasthan has unstable, undulating topography that includes desert regions, and it also comprises of arid soil. So for these reasons, Rajasthan is also not suitable, and Gujarat is dense with swamps. The Himalayan mountains are the least suitable and the last resort for railways. And the reason I say this is because the mountains make it impossible to facilitate any economic trade. There's no source of production, no agricultural, no services, and no manufacturing. The population is sparse, and there's really no opportunity and no need for transport in this region. The region with the most potential and the most opportunities at this point in time, at this juncture of time, is the Konkan region, which is located on the western coastal plain, the upper western coastal plain in the Goa region. And the reason I say this is because the economic opportunities are prevalent, the topography is suitable because it's mostly plain land, and the population is also relatively high. So the Konkan region is an important aspect of India in terms of agricultural production. So that covers the economic opportunities. The topography is primarily plain land, so that also knocks off topography. And lastly, the population is dense, so that covers the population aspect as well. But there's no one-size-fits-all for railways. The problem with the Konkan region is that the tracks can sink because it has extensive floodplains. So what's the ideal location for railways? There can be no undulating topography. So undulating means that there's no fixed pathway. We're going up and down. In other words, it's a hilly region. So we can't have an undulating topography. It has to be plain land. The ground has to be stable. The region has to be densely populated. And has to be economically productive. So is there an ideal location in India that has all of these parameters? Tough chances, because we're a diverse country in terms of our population and in terms of our physiographic divisions. But we could make do with what we have, and accommodate certain infrastructure costs to enable railway connectivity in these regions. For example, in the northern plains, we can construct bridges to cross the river passes, and we could also construct tunnels in the hilly regions. So there could be certain changes in our infrastructure development plans to make way for railway development in these regions. So there's obviously potential, there's scope, but whether we're willing to take the cost or not is the main question. The Indian railway network is facing several issues on account of torts or civil crimes conducted by the Indian population. The main problem is that the maintenance is low, as it's a government institution. And there's several instances of theft, chain pulling, and tailgaters. And tailgaters are people that don't pay tickets, but they still avail the facility of the transport. So these are called torts. They're called civil crimes. And I made a video about law of torts, so be sure to check that out as well. A civil crime involves committing an act that isn't illegal, or it's not prescribed in the Indian Penal Code, but it's a civil crime, meaning that we're not abiding by the civil code or our duties as citizens of India. But that's an entirely different rabbit hole. We'll look at the problems faced by Indian railways. So theft, people are stealing in the trains, and this is causing customers to increasingly avoid availing rail transport. Chain pulling, people are unnecessarily pulling the chain and causing the train to force stop. This is causing infrastructural damage. And tailgaters, people are not paying for their tickets, and this is affecting revenue. So these are a few problems by Indian railways, and they require immediate solutions. The Indian railways also have a rich history. The first rail was initiated and commissioned by Lord Dalhousie in 1853, and it was a single train from Thane to Bombay, or the erstwhile Bombay, which is now Mumbai. So this rich history is still preserved to this day, and railways are still a major source for movement of trade volumes. However, there's been several progress since 1853. For example, we moved from steam-powered engines to now completely electrical trains. And now we're even moving towards electric trains. In the Union Budget of 2022, we commissioned a new project to construct 400 new Vande Bharat trains as a part of the Gati Shakti scheme. Railways have always remained as an index of economic growth, particularly in the 1800s or 1750s, when the Industrial Revolution began picking up pace. And the reason being is that railways are usually an indicator of movement of goods. And when there's movement of goods, we have a stimulation of economic growth. So in the Industrial Revolution, the footprints or the first steps began from an establishment of rail transport in Europe. So when people had the opportunity to move their goods, they realized that they could increase their production, and their goods and services could reach a wider array of countries and states. And movement of goods also enhanced economic growth. It improved their standard of living, and it led to the increase in the number of factories. So railways will forever remain as a significant part of our history, not just Indian history, but world history. That concludes this video on rail transport. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you had a great learning experience. Stay tuned for part 4, where we'll be discussing air transport. And until the next video, this is Ch.7 signing off. Peace.